Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's edition of our Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. My name is Annie Black. I'm the Director of Programs and Volunteers at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I'd like to start by thanking our community partners for this program series, Faith Forward Dallas of Thanksgiving Square, International Rescue Committee in Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission, and the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. We really appreciate your ongoing support of the museum and our programs. We do very much encourage you to ask questions during today's program. If you want to go ahead and locate your Q&A button, it will probably be at the bottom of your screen. If you are on a computer, it might be at the top if you are on a tablet or mobile device. But again, at any point when you have a question, feel free to type it into that Q&A box. We will try to answer as many of those as we can at the end of the program. Today, we are thrilled to have Julie Berman, who is a second-generation survivor speaker with the museum. Julie is the daughter of Holocaust survivors Magda and Les Mittelman. And I know she's going to tell the whole story, so I don't want to steal any of that thunder. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Julie.
Good. Hang on a minute with me. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today and tuning in. I know it's the middle of the week and it's probably a little strange right in the middle of the week to chime in, but I really appreciate you coming. So without further ado, let's get started. Hang on one second. So like Annie said, since both of my parents were Holocaust survivors, that makes me the second generation since the Holocaust. So this story is about my parents and not about me at all. So these are my parents, Magda and Les Mittelman. Cute little couple, don't you think? And that picture in the middle is of them on their wedding day in 1945. Both of my parents came from Hungary. Hungary is in Eastern Europe. It's a fairly small country compared to some of the other ones. My father came from the second largest city in Hungary called Debrecen, and my mom came from a small city called Szolnok. So life before the Holocaust was pretty much just like your lives. My grandparents on the left both had to work. They weren't wealthy. They were fairly poor. My grandmother was a seamstress, so she worked and made dresses for other people. And my grandfather was a salesman, and he traveled quite a bit. The picture in the middle is that of my mom and her older sister. My mom was about 5 years old there. And the picture on the right is at a family wedding. It was probably one of the last pictures that was taken of the family before the war broke out. My mom's side of the family was not very religious, but they would go to synagogue usually on the holidays. And the picture on the right is the class picture that my mom was about 16 years old at the time. My father's side of the family was a little bit better off, probably more like middle class, you would call. My grandfather had a business. He made furniture. And many times after school, my father would go and work with his father and learn the trade. It was a family trade. My grandfather was a furniture maker. My great-grandfather was a furniture maker. So it was a trade that was passed on from one generation to the other. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom. She had 3 boys and a girl to take care of. They were a little bit more religious than my mom's side of the family. My father went to religious school, and on the right, you'll see that's his class picture. He's the one in the red circle, kind of a scrawny little guy. And he also sang in the synagogue choir. but many times he would skip rehearsals because he preferred playing soccer. So then in 1939, Germany invaded Poland and the war began. Hungary did not actually join the war yet, but they were sympathetic to the Germans. So they were on the German side. So the first thing that happened was that the government said everybody, all males over the age of 18, had to enlist into the military. And then a few weeks later, all males who were Jewish had to start wearing yellow armbands so they could tell them apart. And soon after that, they gathered all the Jewish men and they formed them into work battalions. And they would take these groups all over Hungary to start preparing for that time when Germany will actually invade Hungary. And they started building barracks for them and camps and things like that. But many times the Hungarian army officials who were over the Jewish men were very, very brutal. So they were living under very tough conditions. They couldn't get in touch with their families. Their families didn't know if they were dead or alive. And they kept them moving all around. So now I'm going to introduce you to my father, and he's going to tell you about the first place where he was taken to.
Well, there's sometime, where we were housing, there was a elementary school, and she had a friend maybe 2 blocks further, and they knew in the city a lot of Jewish boys there. So the Jewish girls, they came to visiting there. They saying, you need something, we can bring you, etc. There I met with her. And I was there about 10 months in Szolnok. And that's the place which is the most comfortable one, because I get a very good friend, one of the Hungarian sergeant, who knows I met with the girl and I want to go to visiting her. And sometime he take me out from the camp to let me go there, and he picked me up later to go take back to the camp.
So even though Hungary was not yet in the war, actually with the Nazis, things were getting very bad for the Jewish people in Hungary. Anti-Semitism was on the rise, and things were getting tougher and tougher. They couldn't go to school, they couldn't work as much as before, they weren't as free as before. So now my mom's going to tell you about how she had to start wearing the yellow star.
We gathered the yellow stars. We had to wear the yellow stars, and we can go out on the street. My mother, everybody had to make by herself. My mother did it, and I was putting on my coat, on my dress also, because I had a job, and I went to work with my, with the yellow star.
So after 10 months in Szolnok, my father and his unit was shipped out to the Russian front. The Russian front was the border between Poland and Russia, or at that time it was already the Soviet Union. So in this next video, my father's going to tell you what he had to do there.
And there we get a German. And those Germans, they were taking us next to their barrack, and they used us for putting down mines. They signed up an area where we had to put mines there. They show us how to put, or cleaning mines. The first day experience what we had, the 2 boys blew up on that minefield, what they put them up. They didn't do that right, they were careless and stepped on the mine what the another one put it down, because they didn't mark them.
So here you can see we're very lucky to have a couple of pictures of my father with his battalion on the Russian front. So you can see where my father is, but you notice how they're still wearing Hungarian army uniforms, and you can see the yellow armband that tells you these are Jewish soldiers or Jewish slave laborers. So as they're going all along the Russian front, putting down landmines, one of the wagons that carried all of the German supplies broke down. And the German in charge found out that my father can build things and repair things because he used to work for his father in his furniture shop. So he told my father, I'm going to send you over to the next little town and have you fix this wagon. And he did. He sent him over to this little town nearby. And my father walked into this blacksmith's place. And the old man who owned it looked at my father and just started crying, bawling. He's crying. And my father looked at him, why are you crying? And the old man said, because you look so much like my son. And I haven't seen my son in 3 years. And I don't know if he's dead or alive. He said, you come in here and sit down. I'll bring you some food and I'll do all the work for you. I'll fix it for you. And he did. My father had a great meal for a change, you can imagine. And the old man fixed the wagon for him. And before he sent him back to his unit, he said, come here, I want to show you something. And he took him to the front door and he pointed out and he said, do you see there in the middle of the town, that hill? There's a hill there in the middle of the town. Do you see that? He said, that hill consists of 9,000 Jews. He said 9,000 Jews were pulled in here from this town and from other towns nearby. They were brought here with the help of the local Polish people. They were brought here. They were made to dig a ditch, and then they were shot and buried. He said that hill did not stop moving for 3 days. He said that hill will always be here as a reminder to the people who lived here, who collaborated with the Nazis. So by now it was already 1944, and now Hungary actually officially joined the Nazi regime. They actually became part of the war. And so the first order that came from the government was that all the Jewish people have to move into the ghetto. So the ghetto could have been a building, it could have been a neighborhood, it could have been a city block, depending on how many Jews lived in that town, depending on what the ghetto would be. So since Solnok was such a small little city, the ghetto was the school building. And here in these pictures, the picture on the right, you can see some people moving some items, a little wagon with their belongings, into the ghetto. You can see the Hungarian policeman there. He kind of looks like he's pretty pleased with what's going on. He's got a smile on his face. And on the left, you can see how they're boarding it up. So once you're in the ghetto, you can't go out, you can't go to work, can't go to school, you can't go get food for your family. You're given a ration of food. And the situation inside is pretty dire. There's hardly any room. Everybody's in there with their grandmothers and all. And quarters are very tight. So it's pretty bleak. So now my mom's going to talk to you about going to the ghetto. But first, she's going to talk about a chance meeting she had with a German who tried to warn her and why she didn't just leave.
First, that he was in Romania and he saw how the Germans, they people, they picking up children and people on the street, from the street, throwing up on a truck, and they just taking it. And he told they will happen here too. Don't stay here. Go away from here. Where to go? nowhere to go. And he told me that he's giving me address in Berlin. And he told, go to Berlin. And I give you an address where to go. And I told him, I'm not going. I am not leaving my parents. I am going where my parents will go. And then one nice day, there came 2 policemen. And I told, you have to pick up all your things, not too many things, because you are going to the ghetto. So we picked up some bedside, bed things, a pillow and a comforter, and couple of things, dish, and on a little buggy, and we just pull it in the ghetto.
So a few weeks later, another announcement comes, which says you're all going to be deported. They didn't tell them where they're sending them, but they just said, get a few things ready and you're going to the train station. So here in the picture on the left, you can see the people coming down the street, heading towards the railroad station, right in the middle of the road. But what do you see here on the side? You see those people there on the side? Who do you think they are? They're the people who they went to school with, people who they've known all of their lives, people who were neighbors, who they shopped in their stores, people they've known all of their lives. They're just standing there watching as this entire group of people is being taken away. And what are they doing? Nothing. They're bystanders. They're just standing there watching because, hey, I'm not Jewish. And here on the right, you see them at the train station. They look confused. They look scared. They don't know if they should even be scared. They don't know what's happening. They don't know where they're going. So in the next video, my mom's going to talk about the deportation. And she's going to call the boxcars wagons. Some people call them boxcars, other people call them cattle cars. She calls them wagons.
And nobody was telling us anything. And we was going with the second transport. The first transport went in Vienna. We didn't know that. The second transport went to Auschwitz. We didn't know where we going. And we was in the train on this day and on the way to Auschwitz.
Were there other people on the train?
Oh, and the train was full. And the train was full with people. We hardly can sit down.
How old were you?
So, I was 20. Well, they was rushing up us to the wagons. They was even pushing us up on the wagon.
Who was pushing you?
The Germans. And we was about in this wagon. I mean, there was about 5, which one going, or maybe more. We was about 100 people in this wagon, and there was also an old man on the other side in a wheelchair. They was putting on with the wheelchair, and we start to go. We didn't know where we going, but we just moved out, and we was about 3 days on the road, was going, when we saw a chimney, 2 big chimney in the distance, and they was burning. The flame was high up on the sky. And my mother told us that, well, I don't know where we're going, but you get ready that maybe we're going right in the flame. And I don't know why, but I just didn't feel anything. I saw the flame. I didn't feel anything. And then we went closer to the place. Then we we smelled the flesh, the burning flesh. And finally, the train pulled in, unstopped.
So when she said that they were going for 3 days, that meant they were going for 3 days. There were no stopping overnight. There's no food. There's no bathroom facilities. There's hardly room to stand in one place. Imagine 100 people in that cart, in that box cart. If you've been to the museum, then you saw the boxcar. Imagine 100 people in there. They can hardly sit down, let alone stand in one place. So in less than 2 months, Hungary deported 440,000 Jewish people to Auschwitz. Out of those 440,000, 320,000 were murdered as soon as they arrived in Auschwitz. So that's a really huge number. So if you break that down, imagine 20 people in a room. That would mean that 15 out of those 20 would have been murdered as soon as they arrived in Auschwitz. So here in these pictures, you can see the train that had just pulled in. You can see the entrance to Auschwitz, the smoke in the sky, and you can see the people who just came off the train. And they're milling around, running around, trying to find family members, trying to figure out what's going on. And you see the German soldiers out there in the front. You can almost hear them barking orders at them. And the picture on the right, you can see that they're a little bit more organized. Men on one side, women on the other. Notice how many more women there are than men. Remember, I told you all the men had already been enlisted into the military. So the only ones who were still left were either too old or too young to be working. So now we're going to listen to my mom talk about the arrival in Auschwitz.
They was all our relatives, and I was waiting until they coming down. And then I looked in and I saw the door open in the other side. And there was the flame. And the soldier who was open the door, they pushed down the wheelchair with the old man. And then I was running after my mother, and we, two of us, it was dark, it was evening, it was raining. And my mother picked some towels and we put on the head, and we started to going. When I looked back, on the man's just still was standing there in the coat like my father outside. But when we went, it was light because all the reflectors was on. And I saw when we passed it, there was a hill of baby shoes. And right beside this, there was an older hill with eyeglasses. And I told to my mother, where we are going? And from distance, there was a fence, and the woman was standing there and hollering that give the babies to the mother, give the babies to your grandmother or your mother. But they was keep, hollering to us. And we passed this part and we went to a bathhouse. And then we went through all this cleaning of the hair on the body, on the whole body. Well, they was coming also behind us to the same place. But when we started to go, I was looking back. He was still standing there on the first lane in the men's section. And I saw my father. He was looking so sad and so poor with this long winter coat on him. And I just wanted so much to go back to tell him a goodbye. But they was rushing us. And we went in this bathhouse when they cleaned off us, and then after the cutting of the hair, we went to the shower. And when we came out from the shower, they gave us some rags to wear it, which one of them was this short, the other was this long. So we was trying to changing. So when we came out in a big room, there was the men's already, but very few men's came back from the shower. There wasn't more than a dozen.
So there wasn't more than a dozen men who came back from the showers. Again, because they were either too old or too young to be of any use in the camp itself. And also, I was going to mention that the showers, you never knew what was going to happen. The shower could have been regular water coming down like a shower, or it could have been gas. They never knew when they went in there for the showers what was going to happen. So now she was in Auschwitz, and here you can see the barracks, and you can see what kind of quarters they're in. They're wooden bunks, sometimes 3, 4 people in one bunk. Sometimes people had to lay on the concrete floor because it was so crowded. There's nothing there to make their lives at all comfortable. There are no blankets, there are no pillows, there's no heat. Imagine in the middle of the winter how cold it is. There's nothing that would give them any kind of comfort to be. And on the right, you see a group of women. They all had their heads shaven off. They look kind of young. They have some kind of a uniform on. So they probably just came through a selection. So in the next video, my mom's going to talk about the selections. And she's going to mention the name Dr. Mengele. If you haven't heard the name before, Dr. Mengele was known as the angel of death because he was a doctor, an MD, a physician, who was in Auschwitz, and he did the selections and chose which people he wanted to do experiments on. So basically he was torturing them, which is why he was called the angel of death. He didn't use any anesthesia when he was doing all his experiments. He was very curious about twins, about the size of people's heads, different things like that. Crazy. Anyway, so here she is talking about Auschwitz.
The selection, we went out on there was a big place before, right in the entrance, and they was taking at us, and naked. And then I saw first time Mengele, Dr. Mengele, and he was selecting. He selected out my cousin first. And she went on, then a couple of weeks later, they tried to do it to hurt us. On the holidays, there was always selection. On every selection, Mengele showed up. The second selection was about in Rosh Hashanah. And then they selected me. And we were sitting there on the Platz, upper Platz they called, and waiting for, to go. They take it to the or in the shower or right to the station, but usually they give it some normal dress before, they send it to a transport. So, but we were sitting there on the front of the, entrance, and and was waiting there, and I was thinking about my mother, that I leave my mother and my sister and my youngest sister. I always felt she was always very, very thin, and my mother always worried about her, and I was worried too, and I didn't want to leave them. And then I just jumped up and I started to running. And there was a German soldier who was a priest in civil, and a bunch of women around him and listening, his predication. And then I just crawled in the middle. And then saw the post who was after me. He lost me. So I went back to my mother and sister, and we was there until Yom Kippur, and there was an order selection, and they selected my sister. And then I was martyred because I tried to hiding. And they selected my sister. And my sister was gone. Later, they was making a selection again. And every selection I was hiding. And I never was in my mind that they will select old people or not young people. Because until this time, they always was selecting the young people who they take at work, here and there and everywhere. And this time I was hiding, and my mother was on the selection. When I came back, I find out that my mother is not there. I was running out on the street, and I saw my mother is marching, marching there with a bunch of women. They all has a white hair. And I started to running after her and hollering her, but I don't know, he didn't hear me. And I was keep running on the Blockeltester, who was responsible for everybody. She was running after me, and she was trying to find down me. And she told, you have to come back, and don't worry about the people. Don't worry about my mother, where she went. Then she was telling me that she by herself was taking her mother to the gas chamber. And it wasn't felt me better, I tell you the truth.
So now my mom was all alone. But a few weeks later, the Nazis have decided to move some people from Auschwitz to another concentration camp in Germany called Bergen-Belsen. The reason was because now the Russians, the Soviets, were starting to come over the border on the east, and they were afraid that they were going to liberate Auschwitz. So they decided to move 2 train loads of people to Bergen-Belsen. If you've ever read the story of Anne Frank, then you know she was on one of these 2 trains as well. So when my mom arrived in Bergen-Belsen, she found the conditions there were even worse than they were in Auschwitz. But she found her sister and her cousin, both of them alive in Bergen-Belsen. But not too long after she arrived there, the Germans decided to move people again, because now the British were starting to come from the west. So the Russians are coming from the east, the British are coming from the west, and the Americans are coming from the south. At this point, the Nazis knew that they were going to lose the war, but they decided that they wanted to keep moving the Jews deeper into Germany to another concentration camp or another extermination camp. So this time they couldn't put them on a train because the trains were targets for the Allies to bomb. So instead they marched them. They would have these long marches, walks with hundreds, thousands of people marching through Germany, heading towards central Germany. These marches were called death marches. So now we're going to switch back to my father. Remember where we left him off? He was somewhere along the Russian front putting down landmines. And as I said, the Russians are starting to come across that border from the east. And so the Germans started moving my father's unit into Poland. And as they're moving away from the border, again, what happens? A wagon full of supplies breaks down. And the German in charge told my father, pick a couple of guys and you three stay here at the side of the road and fix it. And when you're done, you come and follow us. And he headed out. He left them there. And as soon as they were out of sight, my father looked at his buddies. He said, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going after them. We're out of here. And the three of them took off and went into the nearby forest, heavy woods. And when they ran off, they came across a group of people who said they were partisans. Partisans are resistance fighters. They said, if you want to join us, you can join us. What we do is we go out at night mostly, and we sabotage. We'll blow up their train tracks. We'll blow up their tunnels. We will steal their supplies. We'll do anything and everything to keep them back and allow time for the Russians, the Americans, and the British to get here and liberate Poland. So my father and his buddies joined. So now he was a part of the Polish Home Army, which was a large resistance group. And they would go out and do all kinds of things, blowing up train tracks, blowing up warehouses, anything that they could do to stop the Germans, slow them down, and allow time for the Allies to get there. So now I'm going to let my father tell you what happened when he was in Warsaw, when the Warsaw Uprising happened.
The Warsaw was under German occupation. Germans, they were there. The ghetto was burned already. And they knew it. We have to go in because the Russian getting close to the river, and another side, Wisla. That was the name of the river which is cut at Warsaw half. One side, that name was the river Wisla. One side was Warsaw city, on the other side some suburb or that one. So they expected there the Russian. We was planning to stay there on opposite side, the German side, to anything what we can destroy there. We were 18 people there. And we were hiding daytime in the houses. In the evening we went out. The second evening, I was together with one of my friends, and the big guy, and with another, with Smith, and we was playing with the machine gun. We was set up with the machine gun, and the German patrol who came around there, and that's what we were holding them up, and we had to move back because they were coming up, the Germans, with the tanks. So we moved back about 5 miles from there, about 5 miles, about an hour and a half walk back in the forest, so not to find us. And there they had some small place, building, some kind of storage, something. We put them there to sit there during the daytime. The Germans, they know they have groups there around that city, which is guerrilla groups, and they want to get rid of it. And the German airplane, Germans took us, they came at daytime looking us. And they find that building because he turned back, and when we saw he turn back, we jump out from the building and some ditches close there, we lay down there. They started to hit bombing that building, and they shooting machine gun. So that building, what we had, I just started, we went there when we got there to sleeping there. I took off everything, just the pants in the shirt I had there. And there I had the watch in my pocket that I get from my girlfriend when I met with her in Solna before we left. He gave me a silver watch, a flat one, what they were wearing in the small pocket. I left there, so the watch is burned there with my everything else. And we were lucky because we got away without any scratch with the German gun, and we tried to go back to the unit. So we got back to the basic unit, and the third day we went back to the Warsaw again, because every night a different group went there. So the third night was our tour to go there. So I went there, we were sitting on the top of the storage place, a higher place, we were sitting there. And the Germans, they were patrolling, and they show us up there on the hill, on the top of the building, and they started shooting us. And we was replying there, and I was in the machine gun, and Sam, he was with me with the belt, which is the heavy, they call them, and the bullet to get into the gun. And a minute I telling Sam, I don't get supply, I stuck, what are you doing? I looking at Sam had no head. They cut. They were shooting them with the machine guns, and I don't know, they was some kind of grenades, and probably that one of them cut his head. Just he had no hair right next to me. Oh my God, I said, I had full bloody. And behind the building was my friend who was preparing to fill the belt with the bullet. I said to him, Reisner, let's go from here, because the gun is gone. We have no way where to stay here. And we tried to go, getting darker that day. We tried to go next to the building, we were laying down behind them, and we know we had a plan to 10 o'clock evening to get one spot where we're supposed to get together to moving back further. And evening at the evening, I said, no, right, we have to move. So we started to going slowly, and they were shoot up those candles, like with the air, they're shooting up candles, which is coming back down with the parachute, and they light up the whole area. So when they shoot up, they picked up us with the light, and they started the shooting. The first cut, what they getting, I get hit. They hit me, my leg, a couple of places. My legs get hit from here down, and I couldn't stand up on it. And I am telling to my friend, Reisner, I can't stand on my legs. Would you help me to go try to get to the house? He said to me, you crazy. How can I help you? Everyone is gonna die here. I can't help you. I can't help myself. And he left me there. So I was staying there. The biggest wound was my knee. And I had to tear my shirt and try to clean in the top, but I couldn't move. So I would stay there about get completely dark, and I tried to crawling from there. And again, the candles went up in the air, and they saw me there, and I got a second time. And they shoot me that time on my arm, my head, and on my back. So I was there. I couldn't move. I was bleeding there, and I left there unconscious. And I waked up next couple of hours later, probably. They were carrying me. They're carrying me on the stretcher to Polak. They're taking me somewhere. And that time, I have to mention to you, I was wearing a Hungarian army uniform. What we was taking during the time when we were in the guerrillas. They were robbing one of the storage places what they had, the armies there. So they didn't know who I am. They know I had wearing a uniform, which is not Polish, not Russian. They know Germans, that's a Hungarian uniform. So they carried me the first aid place. They took me a first aid place, and the two boys who there carried the stretcher, they know me because they were part of there, but they get caught with the Germans, they caught them. And one of them is telling me in my ear, don't worry, Magyar. That's the way the Polak call the Hungarian. Don't worry, Magyar, M-A-G-A, because we're not going to tell them who you are.
So my father was shot, 13 bullets across his body. And the Germans picked him up because he was wearing that Hungarian army uniform, and they knew the Hungarians were on their side. So they thought that he was probably just a soldier who got caught in the crossfire. They took him to a field hospital where a doctor operated on him. And during the surgery, the doctor realized that this guy is Jewish. So the doctor quarantined my father away from all the other German soldiers who were also in the hospital, put him in a separate room, and saved his life a second time. The doctor would come 2 or 3 times a day to bring him food and change his bandages, and basically saved his life a third time. But after about 2 weeks, the doctor came one night and he said, tonight, after everybody is asleep, I want you to crawl out the window and leave here because we're being sent back to Germany. The Russians are going to take over Warsaw and we are being sent back to Germany. So that night, my father crawled out the window and started heading back to Hungary on crutches, back home. So the war was coming to an end. Germany, Poland, both were being bombed continuously by the Allies. So my mom, as you remember, was still on that death march. So now she's going to talk about how she was liberated.
Well, we was working in the factory until March. In March, they was coming the British, and we had to, move from there. I mean, they wanted to take back to Bergen-Belsen, so we went on the road to walk until Bergen-Belsen, but Bergen-Belsen fell to the English, to the British, and they can't take there. So we was walking to Bavaria.
Walking?
For the walking to the mountains. We was walking usually in the night, but sometimes we was walking on the day too. It was snowy and slippery and through to the mountain where it was terrible. My sister was all the time with me. I was watching her carefully. I was taking care of her how I can. And we arrived in Dresden station. When we arrived there was an air raid. On the Germans, they just closed the doors, and they ran to the bunkers in Germany, and in the middle of Germany. And we was praying in this vacon because this, we was up and down, jumping up and down on the first train, and then we went on the road, and we was going to a really wooded area, lots. I mean, not wood, trees area. Both sides of the road is trees, and we was going on. A friend of ours had an infection in the leg, and we was helping her on the 2 sides on carrying her little bag. And when we passed a little wood house on the side, then I went inside and I just pushed them out behind behind the little building, and we were standing there all the way until this whole big transport is passed by. We went in this village, we just picked up a house and we went in and we asked some food. And there this lady invited in and gave us some sandwich. And when we left, she gave us a bag cooked potato. And she came out to the door with us and she told, this way coming the Russians, and this way they coming the Americans. And then I told to my sister, okay, let's go to America. And we went on this way, and we find 3 soldiers was coming on the bicycle.
So now the war was ending. It was over. And as you can imagine, it's pretty chaotic. Everybody wants to go home. There are Russian, British, American soldiers. There are German soldiers. There are survivors, those who can still maneuver on their own. Everybody wants to get home. So my mom had to make her way through Germany, through Austria, and back to Hungary to Szolnok. That took several weeks. Most of it was done on foot because the trains had all been bombed. They weren't working. Sometimes she could catch a ride with a truck or a car that would pick people up, but most of it was done on foot. Very difficult to get back home. And when she got back home, the first thing she did was look for family members. She didn't know who survived and who didn't survive. At the same time, my father was making his way back from Poland to Hungary to Debrecen. He had to make his way through what today is the Czech Republic and get back to Debrecen. When he got back, a day later, his mom and his older sister with a 5-year-old child arrived back as well. That was quite a miracle because usually the older people and the younger people did not survive. So when my mom went looking for family members, she decided before she starts, she would send a telegram to Debrecen to my father to say, I'm back, come and get me. And then she went to look for family members in all the different little towns and cities where they used to live. And every time she would go to a different town, she would leave a note saying, if Les comes, tell him I went to that town. And in the next town, she would leave a note, if Les comes, tell him I went to that town. And so everywhere she left little notes to say, if he comes, make sure you tell him I went over there. So my father got her telegram, and the next day he hopped on a train and made his way over to Szolnok to look for her. But instead of finding her, he found a little note that said, I went to this town. And in the next town, he found another note that said, I went to that town. So he followed all her notes until he finally caught up with her. And they were married the next day. And you saw their picture there in the beginning of the presentation. So a few years later, Hungary in 1949 decided to become communist. My father said, okay, you know what, that's it. We've been trying to put our lives together, but Hungary makes all these decisions that are just wrong for us, so we're leaving. So you don't just leave a communist country, you have to escape. And so they left Hungary over to Austria. They made their way from Austria to Italy. And from Italy, they went to Israel. They arrived in Israel, 1949. And what do you think is going on there? There's a war on. And so my father right away joined the Israeli army and was part of the creation of the new Jewish state. So I was born in Israel. And so in 1964, my family moved from Israel to the United States. And in 1986, my parents joined me and my husband in Texas. And so here we are. The family has grown quite a bit. And my parents loved living in Texas. They really enjoyed it. My father traveled all over. He loved to go visiting different cities and different towns. And when he used to be stopped and say, people would say to him, "Boy, you have such a thick accent. Where are you from?" He would say, "Oh, I'm from West Texas." And they would say, "Oh yeah, that's right. I can see that." So that's it. That's the end of the presentation. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing that story. We do have a couple questions that I wanted to ask. The first one being, did your parents share their story with you when you were younger, or did it take until you were an adult to learn this? What was that like?
Actually, they did not. My parents did not talk about the Holocaust at all. Whenever I would ask, about family, about grandparents that I didn't have, they would just say, "Well, you shouldn't know from such things." They never really talked about it. Actually learned about what they went through when they did this particular interview that you're seeing. That was the first time I actually heard their entire story. And what you've seen today here is just a tiny little portion of it.
The next question we have is, you showed some of their family photos from before the war. How did they keep those? How did they get those back?
They were very lucky. My mom had an aunt who was married to a non-Jew. And so she was able to, wasn't sent to Auschwitz, and she was able to save some of the pictures.
Okay. Follow-up question about the interview. This is an interesting question. If your parents weren't sharing their story very much, do you know why they agreed to do the interview or the interviews that we saw today?
Because I forced them.
Okay.
I wanted them to talk about it for a long, long time. They always refused. I remember I even bought my father some, back in those days, it was a tape recorder and little cassettes. And I bought a bunch of them and I said, "Just sit down and start talking." And of course that didn't happen. But when this interview happened, this was the Shoah Foundation. Steven Spielberg went around the world and interviewed Holocaust survivors. I insisted that they do this, not for me so much, but for their grandchildren. And I was thrilled that they agreed finally.
And how did you feel when you got to watch these interviews back for the first time? How did that make you feel to see their stories for the first time on video?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Now
Okay. The question was, how did that make you feel to see their stories for the first time, to see that whole story laid out?
Very emotional and very proud. And I was already 40 years old when I actually got to see the whole thing. And so by then I had kids, and when I saw it, I was obviously very emotional and actually kind of sorry that I gave them such a hard time at certain times. As a teenager, you're pretty nasty to your parents and you're disrespectful. And so I was actually very sad that I was so, that I didn't know, because I wish I would have. I probably wouldn't have said certain things back in those days.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have one more question for you before we wrap up. I know that, especially in more normal times, you've told your story to students at the museum, you speak regularly for the museum. What inspired you to take this on, to want to share your parents' stories with the greater public?
Because the story has to be told. It isn't so much about my parents' story, because everybody has a story. Every person that survived the Holocaust has a story. And it's not that one is greater than the other. It's just that it has to be told. These stories have to be told so that future generations will learn from them. And hopefully we pray that it doesn't ever happen again.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. We so appreciate you sharing your story today and your parents' story. It's such an important, as you said, story to tell, all of these stories that we hear. So thank you all for joining us. We hope we've got 2 more days of spring break survivor speakers. So tomorrow we have survivor Rosie Ann Zerner, and on Friday we have second generation speaker Ron Schwartz. We hope you'll join us for those. You can check those out on our website, but otherwise we hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.